Assuming she's here.
We're running a Zoom from out there and a live meeting in here, so more people can participate. And we have people, I just have to tell you, we have people from the Rio Grande Valley, where a lot of ocelots hang out. And we have people from right here in San Antonio. We have people from all the surrounding counties. I think we've got about 50-something people online. And we have a couple of really bad golf course jokes. See the bird on the bottom. You get the idea. There were no comments on the ocelot joke. However, my name is Patsy England, and I'm the Vice President of Bear Audubon. I kind of work with education, engagement programs, outings. And of course, we have tonight live. She's usually not here live. Is Becca. She's the program chair and gets all these wonderful speakers for us. And we have Laura Reynolds here, does our newsletters and all those kind of things. And who else? Sherry, where's Sherry? She's the outings queen. And we have so many people who have helped with all these projects so far. And we're so gratified with that because it really does make a difference. You are making a difference. And the more we learn about this data gathering and so forth, it's really wonderful. But without further ado, I have to tell you a story about this speaker we have tonight. She calls herself Sharon Wilcox. She is Dr. Sharon Wilcox, I have to say. She may know Sheldon. You don't want to leave that out. Becca and I and Tom, my husband, were at REI in 2019 at a presentation about vendors of wildlife. And we heard Sharon Wilcox speak about ocelots. And we looked at each other and we went, we need her for Bear Audubon. And I think tonight you can see why. Who doesn't love a little spotted cat that is so adorable? It's not up there yet, it will be. And so we're really happy that after all the ups and downs and the ins and outs that Sharon was able to make it here. She lives in Austin. And she's a full-time employee of the Senior Texas Representative for Defenders of Wildlife. They do so much good work, and so please have that partnership with them. So she's going to talk about like the Texas's own leopard. You know, he is not very big, but he sure is cute. So she leads the ocelot conservation program in South Texas. And of course, she'll tell us all the challenges involved in that, as you can imagine. And she's also working with the bigger cats, the jaguars, restoring them to portions of central New Mexico and Arizona where they once were fairly regular, and probably bigger challenges there. And if you want to see a jaguar, you can go over to the San Antonio Zoo and see a pair over there. And we think that one day we're going to have some baby jaguars pretty soon, we hope. Now, Sharon, back to Sharon. She's an associate professor of practice in geography, which she teaches from home for students, and sustainability. And then she also works at the Defenders of Wildlife. So she is on the board at the Friends of Laguna, Atascosa. And if you haven't been down to Laguna, Atascosa, you owe yourself a trip. Especially in the wintertime when there's about 90% of all the redhead ducks in North America winter down there. And you can see all kinds of wonderful things. But Sharon's going to talk about what she does with ocelots, but she's also the co-editor of a book called Historical Animal Geographies, where they once were, and we want them again, right? So she's done a lot of different things. She's received support from the National Endowment for the Humanities, Smithsonian Institution, Research Council. And we're just so happy to have you tonight.
Well, thank you. My evening coffee. Yes, I do live in Austin, so I'll be back up. Tonight we drink coffee. Thank you so much for the invitation to come speak. We met a few weeks before the whole world shut down, and I'm just so delighted to get to do this in person. You know, webinars are great, and I'm so glad to see the turnout today for this webinar, this hybrid event. But there is really something special about getting to do this in person, and I'm really excited to be able to engage with Texans again and have chats with them about our super cool native cat, and help rally support for this cat. They, are on the brink of extinction. We'll talk about that. And I'll talk about at the end of my talk how you might be able to help us. I'll ask that you hold questions until the end of my talk, and because the way it's structured, I find often the answer is just one more slide in front of the question. And I'm happy to hang as long as possible to answer questions. And yeah, as Patty mentioned, I wear a couple of hats in the region. I'm Defender's Senior Texas Representative, so I lead their ocelot conservation program. I work a lot with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, other partners like American Forests, Nature Conservancy, and then we also work to some degree with private landowners. A quick note on that, a show of hands, how many of you saw American Ocelot, the film that aired on PBS? Okay, so some representation. I encourage you to check it out. You should be able to view it for free, or at least maybe a few dollars on Amazon. That's Texan filmmaker Ben Masters' work. He captured unprecedented imagery, film of these cats living their lives on the landscape. Ocelots are notoriously shy and very difficult to study. So you're gonna hear me say a couple times tonight, oh, we're still learning about this. When you watch Ben's film, you'll really get a nice view into the world of private land conservation for these cats. Now, I will be speaking tonight largely about public lands work, and these two pieces really come together nicely, as we've already heard tonight with birds, right? Both the public and private lands are such important portions of conservation, especially in a state that is 95% private land. What else can I tell you? Oh yeah, I am faculty here at UTSA. I teach in the Department of Geography. I've been there, gosh, for 13 years now, which is crazy. Since COVID, I don't have to make my commute anymore, so I mostly teach online these days. And then I am on the board at Laguna, and I'm more than happy to answer questions about the Refuge as well. So, images you see tonight will be of the cats on the Refuge. And so you'll often see like black and white imagery. I'll talk more about later why these images are in black and white. And yeah, almost every image you see will be a wild ocelot, an ocelot living on the landscape in Texas. So let's start here. I get this question all the time. Wait, well, what is an ocelot? This is what people think I know. The most frequent response I hear, even here in the valley, people go, oh, the lizard. In Mexico. Ocelot. And there's a reason people connect these two animals, even though they seem very different. And it's their shared nomenclature. Both names come from the native indigenous language, Nahuatl. And both species were native to Mexico, or lands that are now known as Mexico, right? And so you can see in the structure of that word, I'm not a linguist, but you get the sense. And in fact, ocelot or jaguars were known as ocelotl. And ocelot had a different permutation of that name. But both, yeah, these species are sharing this deep indigenous history, this deep history of being recognized on the landscape and acknowledged by human communities. So when people do know what an ocelot is, this is often the most common reference I get. People go, oh, baboon. Now remember that name, baboon. He comes up again later. This is a cartoon for adults called Archer. It aired on FX. I think it might still be airing. It's sort of a James Bond cartoon, but the main character is obsessed with big cats. And he's also specifically obsessed with an ocelot named Baboon. And so this cat pops up throughout the series. Now, if you're not an adult, this is probably how you know ocelot. Minecraft is, I forget the technical term, it's a multiplayer, yes. This game is for all ages. So I often find like kids know these cats from this landscape, this ecology, if you will. My understanding is you cannot be an ocelot, you cannot own an ocelot, but you can befriend an ocelot in this virtual space, yes. And so I like that representation of these cats because it sort of gets back to their conservation story. They are animals that live alongside us even when we don't see them. There we go. And then finally, I did want to mention this cartoon, Wildcats. It is a terrific cartoon that focuses on different wildlife species. This episode, Spots in the Desert, was actually focusing on cats in the Sonoran Desert. But I will mention that the biologist at Laguna, Atascosa, the ocelot biologist, was consulted on this episode. So the writers do a really terrific job of fact-checking their writing and ensuring that they are really contributing to education from a young age. All right, so yeah, let's get back to this main character. So what is an ocelot? He is a medium, or they are a medium-sized wildcat, right? And there's actually some debate if they're medium or small wildcats. You know your big cats, your big roaring cats, your jaguars. Our jaguars are the only big cat in the Americas. And then we have a plethora of small and medium-sized wildcats, and mostly south of here, running from Mexico south. That's part of what makes ocelots special here in Texas. Now, these cats are most readily identified by their coat pattern. Each cat has a unique chain rosette pattern. That spotting pattern is like a fingerprint. And that is really handy for us when we're studying them, because over time we build databases of imagery, remote camera work on these cats, and we can start to identify individuals. Now, it can take some time to match up the different sides, right? To like build a composite of one cat. But once we have that imagery, it's so important for understanding, for instance, population size. Now, if you think of a mountain lion where they're all sort of that tawny color, it's a lot more difficult to identify individuals. Then we're looking for like notches in ears, kinks and tails. These guys make it a little easier for us. The coat pattern, again, very unique. Their coat is incredibly plush and soft. Even amongst wildcats, I would say it stands out to me in the quality, the uniqueness of the fur. We'll talk about that again later. And then again, these are about 15 to 30 pound cats. If you think about the largest house cat you know, he's probably pushing 15 to 20 pounds, right? So again, when we say medium-sized wildcat, we're still talking a small cat that stands about 12 to 18 inches max at the shoulder. Now this, I start early with this slide for a reason. Ocelots and bobcats share space in Texas. Where you find ocelots in Texas, you also find bobcats. And bobcats are very frequently mistaken for ocelots. I get a lot of people, emailing me images. I love working on species identification like that. Most of the time, a suspected wild ocelot is a bobcat. I'd say in all the years I've been doing this, one time somebody emailed me and said, oh, I think we have pictures of an ocelot, and it actually was a wild ocelot. We'll see those photos later on. You may have seen them in the news about 6 months ago or 3 months ago. But if we look at the bobcat, there's always one detail I go to immediately, and it's how bobcats got their name. It's the tail. Bobcats have a short tail. They also have longer legs. They look taller. They have more triangular ears that sit up on top, and they have that cheek floof, or what we call sideburns. And it's notable that these cats have a different spotting pattern. They might have little spots in their coat. They might also have rosettes, but they're not nearly as clearly defined as the black outline. Ocelot coat patterns really pop. They are so clearly outlined. And ocelots have very long tails. So again, that is the thing that's usually the easiest way to tell the two apart. I will say this though, bobcats don't always have very short tails. They can have a tail about this long. They also can have spotting patterns that almost mimic an ocelot. And what's really interesting is we mostly see that here in Texas. Now, there's no genetic evidence of crossbreeding between the species. Rather, we think it's like an adaptation thing that happened in this environment. But we get these images, come on, like this sometimes. What do you think this cat is? Bobcat or ocelot? Very good. I heard it. Yep. Triangle ears. That spotting pattern is like more molted, right? It doesn't pop off the coat the same way. And there's a bit of grayness to that background color that we never see in ocelots. So this is, and you can see when he turns his head, the cheek floof, all of it. Now we jokingly call these bobolots. Again, they are not hybrids. The biologists and I have a lot of fun with bobolots. Again, most of the time when we see images, It is a bobcat, but I encourage you, if you ever know someone who does have an image like from their ranch or an image they grabbed on the road, visiting a refuge, always send it in because it's really valuable information and we don't mind checking these at all. All right, so ocelots can be found pretty much throughout the Americas. They range northward from northern Argentina all the way to Texas and Arizona. Now, Arizona, we have a very small record these days of these cats. We have what we call lone male dispersers. These are cats, ocelots, that we are finding in the same area where jaguars are sighted. And this image on the right-hand side is one of these ocelots in Arizona. Now, we have no photographic evidence yet of a female. And without females, we have not met the criteria for a population. So I always hope for a female or like a cub, kitten, I should say, to run by, because then we'd be able to sort of level up their protection in Arizona as well. But for now, these cats are sort of set aside as males who are accidentally wandering into Arizona from Mexico. Now here in Texas, we have a breeding population. We have 60 to 80 ocelots, we believe, living on both private and public land. This is the northernmost breeding population. So the public lands cats are found in Cameron County at Laguna, Atascosa. And then we have private lands cats in Willacy County and some other surrounding counties as well. Some ranch owners are more forthcoming, willing to talk about the presence of cats publicly than others. And so we really respect and allow those ranchers to speak for themselves as to the presence of cats on their lands. And then just south of the border, about 100 miles south, we have a great population of ocelots in Tamaulipas. So that gives you a sense of our current range. And then you'll also see that it's kind of hard to see on the screen, but that purple shading that encompasses most of Texas, that is the historic ocelot range. I'm going to show you in a bit how we've been able to build that record back and determine where these cats were in the past. But first, let's talk a little more about these cats and their lives in the landscape. It helps to frame some of the challenges and opportunities to their conservation. So these cats are dietary generalists. You might. Good news is these guys aren't birders. They really like rodents. Yeah, they're not up to no good like their feral cousins. So ocelots are opportunistic hunters like all cat species. They tend to pounce on what's moving in front of them. These cats tend to live in thick, thorny brush, and they're very interested in the reptiles, amphibians, rodents, bunnies that are traveling at ground level. They are ambush predators, so they tend to hide and then pounce. And the thing that really governs their prey selection is their size. Yeah, remember, they're like 15 to 20 pounds. You're never going to see this cat take down cattle, right? These are not what we call conflict species. They are not interfering with livestock. They could take a chicken, but we really don't have any history of conflict on chicken with ocelots. And yeah, so this helps keep them out of trouble, which has been great for them. And I'll just point out the cool green jay there. He is the other symbol of Laguna, Atascosa. All right, so let's talk more about that habitat they live in. So as much as ocelots aren't really picky about what they eat, they are extremely picky about where they live. They exclusively live in Tamaulipan thorn forest in Texas. So you go to other parts of their range south of here, they live in different forest types. But here in Texas, the only forest they'll live in is the Tamaulipan thorn scrub. Now, if you've ever had the pleasure of crawling through thorn scrub, I sacrifice clothing to the thorn forest every year as it pulls at my clothes as I try and get in there. It's very dense. It's like an arms race in there with the plants, right? Everything is spiny. You have different shrubs and low-lying trees, grasses, forbs, succulents. So it's incredibly dense and incredibly thorny. Now, it's home to 1,200 plant species, we believe. 530 bird species use it at different times of the year. And we believe 300 butterfly species, although the count on butterflies, we're still working on in terms of their presence in this forest. Now, this forest is ideal for ocelots. It is terrific for denning, raising young, protection, and again, that ambush hunting. Now, when I say protection, it's great for them to hide from humans and also from coyotes and other larger predators. Historically, the areas they occupy were also occupied by jaguars. And we do have records, current records of jaguars preying on ocelots. And so this has been excellent protection for them. And if you're ever at a place where you can get near the thorn scrub, if you get down to like ocelot level and look at that very base level of about a foot or two, it's remarkably open at the very base of that forest. But the minute you come up even a bit, it is very dense. And that's another photo. It's not great. It is very, very hard to photograph the thorn forest. But the one thing I would call out in this image, and again, it's better on that screen than this one for this, is the longer you look at it, the more variation you see in the green. You start to get a sense of that incredible diversity of plants that are occurring within that forest structure. All right, so ocelots are, again, very cryptic. They are very shy animals. They hang out in the thorn forest, and they are nocturnal or maybe crepuscular. So nocturnal, most active at night, crepuscular, active at dawn and dusk. From the activity we've seen, unfortunately, when they're hit on roads, it's often at dawn. But during the daylight hours, they are typically tucked away, although it is possible to see one out in the daylight. If you were to see an ocelot in the daylight, it doesn't mean they're sick or anything. They just typically prefer to be in the forest during the day. Now, I sometimes get a question about this image. This is at Laguna. I can sip water really quick. Now, if you look at that fence behind him, this cat's not in a cage. Rather, that's hog fencing. We have a feral hog population at the refuge, and they are very destructive. And at this refuge, we also have what we call bubblers or water fountains for wildlife. And that's one such structure behind him. And what that is at times during the year, it can be very difficult to access clean water on the refuge. So this is an intervention, a human-led intervention to help support wildlife on this refuge. Some purists would argue that we should not be taking this step. However, I might argue that with global climate change and other human-born anthropogenic changes, we've got to sometimes help these species with a leg up. So these bubblers are terrific, but the hogs want them too, and they start to dig up the entire structure. So we fence them in, but that fence is only about 3 feet tall. The cats jump right over it, or they actually go through the squares because cats being cats, they can slide through some incredibly tight spaces. The added benefit of this, we set camera traps around the bubblers and get an incredible view of the wildlife that live on the refuge. If you look at the background here, we've got 2 kittens. So we're still learning a lot about ocelot fecundity, like how many babies do they have? How long are they pregnant in the wild? How frequently do they get pregnant? We do know that their reproductive rate is slow, so their population replacement rate is slow. These cats tend to have 1 to 2 kittens every 2 years. And in the wild, they live to be about 10 years old. And so if you assume that they're starting to reproduce at age 2, you can see that one cat only produces so many kittens in her lifetime. And so due to that, again, that replacement rate for the population is quite slow, and this becomes a real challenge for us in conservation and sort of regrowing the population. And partially due to that and many other reasons we're going to focus on in a moment, the conservation status of this cat in Texas is critically endangered. And again, we believe we have fewer than 80 left in the US. Let's take a look at how we got here. Why are there so few ocelots? Given the amount of large ranch space, especially in South Texas, right? We've got sweeping large ranches. You would think there's plenty of room for these cats. How have their numbers dipped so low? Well, first, let's go back. You'll remember I showed you that purple sort of polygon on that map that was showing us that historic range. Here's how we do historic geography on animals. We go to sources like newspapers, and we look for stories where people are talking about tigers, leopards, any cat word. We start to pull these up. We go to many universities, UTSA, UT, Texas A&M, have incredible archives, both from ranches, newspapers, all sorts of record keeping, where you can start to tease out whispers of these cats in the past. Now, sometimes it can be hard to tell if they're talking about jaguars or ocelots, because we had wild jaguars in Texas until the 1940s, which is really incredible. So on this map, you're looking at orange spots are jaguars, yellow are ocelots. And we're going to focus on the yellow today, the ocelots. You'll notice we have a couple of yellow dots up near Amarillo. And as far east is Beaumont. And then as far west here in the Big Bend region. And that is far outside of where we think of those cats being today. So clearly they used to occupy a greater diversity of habitats than they do now. And again, we're found in a much broader range. And the way I'll show you in a moment after this slide, I'll show you how we're able to decide what animal we're documenting in these historic records. But this is also a good example. This is from 1942. This is a story from a local paper in Los Fresnos. A man was driving down a road, hit a cat, got out. It was a wild ocelot. He didn't kill it. It was just sort of stunned. So you'll notice here, though, what happens is he takes it home and puts it on display. And this is sort of a common story for these cats. They're either killed or captured when they come into interaction with humans. Here, this is a great example of how we're building that historic record. This is Waco, 1959. Amarillo, 1950. These are both stories that were accompanied with images that are clearly ocelots. And so we're able to, again, build that record back of these stories from local people, local communities encountering these cats. Now, as I mentioned, when these cats came into contact with humans, it didn't end well. You may be familiar with the sort of American posture toward predators in history. So with colonization, with the arrival of white folks, there was a widespread killing of predators, indiscriminate killing of predators. You've often heard the story of the wolf, right? It's sort of that iconic story of just eliminating predators as we moved. And of course, the lessons that we then came to in the 20th century through people like Aldo Leopold, who started to reflect back on what it meant to eliminate predators. Now, ocelots were never in conflict with humans. They don't pose a threat to safety or to enterprise, to ranching, but they were still predators. And so they often fell victim to trapping, to poisoning, or they fell victim to other sorts of human entertainment like pet keeping. Ocelot pet keeping reached its peak in the 1950s in this country. And you would not believe the amount of material you can find out there from the 50s about ocelots as pets. This image on the left is from National Geographic, calling a Texas ocelot an overgrown tabby and fancy dress. He's in Texas playing with an armadillo. So when you have sources like National Geographic calling them tabby cats, right, that's really creating sort of a social acceptance around bringing these cats into your home. This book on the top, An Ocelot in Your Home, I found that on Amazon. And then also we have groups like the Long Island Ocelot Club. And you can go look at all of their newsletters. This was a group in New York of folks who owned ocelots and got together to enjoy talking about hanging out with ocelots. This had really been sort of socially, was socially acceptable to think of these cats as pets. Also, Life magazine ran this photo series on a woman living with her ocelot. There are many more photos of her hanging out with this cat in her daily life. That was in 1961. And here, this is the most popular ocelot that lived as a pet ever. This is the original babu. This is Salvador Dali's pet ocelot. This cat lived in New York with him, went to fancy restaurants, went on cruise ships, and was often photographed in society pages. So again, there's just this idea like, oh yeah, those cats are really cool looking tabbies that you can have in your home. Now, of course, where are these cats coming from? People were capturing them in the wild, often as babies, taming them and selling them. Fortunately, today, this is not such a problem for ocelots because of international laws that prohibit the movement of endangered species across international borders. And we have a growing and evolving ethic about keeping wildlife as pets. It's, as we've all seen Tiger King, it's still a thing, but it's definitely viewed more as like a fringe sort of thing rather than mainstream Life magazine lifestyle. Now, another thing was happening in the mid-20th century, and that was the popularity in fur coats. I mentioned earlier, ocelots' fur is uniquely soft. That became a problem for them. Their coats were highly desired for fur garments, and unfortunately, it takes many ocelots to make a fur coat. They're small cats, and so many ocelots were killed in order to make these in-demand coats. And again, here we see a change in sort of social mores. Folks aren't really wearing fur anymore. If they do, the ethical thing to do is to, wear vintage fur. So we see the market in killing for fur has decreased substantially. So in the mid-20th century, these were really the pressures on these cats. Here again, so it's going to be hard to see on here, but if you look over there, you can see a bit more of the shading. Again, we have the current occupied range. Now let's think about why they're declining today since the mid-20th century. If you look carefully at that map, you can see that red developed land heat map underneath the purple overlay, and then agriculture as well. Today, the greatest threat to ocelots is loss of habitat. They really are sort of innocent bystanders in their own destruction. And so traditionally in the valley, this was very much about agriculture. These are very rich soils. And so the land was being turned over in order to grow, groceries that went all over the country. But today, even agriculture is under threat in the valley. Today, we're seeing something very different. Now, I will say we also have some very unique challenges in the valley. Brownsville Ship Channel is what you're looking at right here. So oil and gas extraction, conveyance, and export. So we have export terminals, we have pipelines. All of this is destroying remaining habitat. And as you look at this image, off on the right in the horizon, we have lomas, which are remaining hills of that thorn forest that through the 1990s would occasionally have ocelots on them. So this area in recent memory was occupied by ocelots. And so, for instance, Defenders of Wildlife 2 years ago, we sued to stop construction on the Ship Channel, wanting to halt it where it is now. We did not prevail. And we remain very concerned. I want to say one of the 3 parcels we were suing over has since been completely, turned over and is now being constructed on. So the Ship Channel back toward Brownsville is developed, and that's been done. What we wanted to do was protect out toward the mouth what remained. So far, we have not been too lucky. However, the Ship Channel leadership is now really taking a different posture on some of these remaining wild spaces around the channel, and they are exploring entering an agreement to protect some of the lomas. So I have to give them credit that they are hearing the message behind some of these lawsuits and some of the protests that groups like Sierra Club, Save RGV, other groups have launched to try to save some of these wild spaces, because the Ship Channel is at a crucial spot, right, for birding, for wild spaces, and we can't lose all of this. I have a unique job at Defenders. I get to also talk about SpaceX a lot. So it's unique for me now, but I guarantee you this is going to become a problem for a lot more folks I work with. We are seeing a proliferation in private space launching facilities. We have one at Boca Chica, which is, if you go straight out 4 from Brownsville, you end at the beach. That used to be the People's Beach. Now it is Elon Musk's beach, not really. Still the People's Beach, but Elon Musk has the ability to control access through that highway. And he owns that land, a small parcel of land that is surrounded by state and federal lands. Now, what's unique about this place, Boca Chica, is it's the experimental launch facility. So you may have seen about a month ago, the most powerful explosion, non-nuclear explosion in human history happened at this site. And we have stunning evidence of how bad this is for the lands and the inhabitants. As well as I want to say, this is the lands, the historic lands of the Carrizo Comecrudo. And there are absolutely still artifacts and we believe ancestral remains out there. So this has layers, this environmental justice. We're talking about scorched bird eggs. We have piping plover and red knot present at least part of the year at this site. I believe it's the most significant site in Texas for red knot. I could be wrong about that though, but both birds are right around the launch site. We also have 5 species of sea turtle using that beach right on the other side of the dunes. And this is in the ocelots corridor. We have space junk that falls from these explosions. We have wildfires that are set. We're going increasingly concerned about vibration and sound that are emitted from these launches. So we have a lot of work to do to understand what's happening here and to negotiate some mitigation so we can offset some of this. This ultimately becomes like a big federal fight. Unfortunately, I've testified before the FAA. We've sat in many meetings with different congressional committees. Basically, you have the Department of the Interior with Fish and Wildlife at odds with FAA, who does launch permits, and NASA, who has invested at least $4.5 billion into SpaceX. So we're at a real crossroads here where different agencies have invested in different ways in the same space. There is a lawsuit that has been filed. Defenders of Wildlife is not on it, but many of the coalition members I work with are, and they are attempting to require a more in-depth environmental assessment, an EIS of this site. In part, an EIS would require them to halt these activities while we study in much greater detail what's happening here. I'll also say the group Coastal Bays and Estuaries are the ones doing the monitoring on the avian species at that site. They are doing incredible work. You won't hear them speaking out loud like in the media. That's because they have to protect the ability to access these sites, but they share information with groups like us who can share images like this. This gives you a sense of how compressed this geography is. So at the very top of the map, that is where the ocelots live. If we come down just a bit, Laguna Atascosa is not contiguous, fully contiguous. There's another portion of Laguna, and then we're right into the ship channel, and you cross the ship channel and you're at SpaceX. So at the same area, we like to think of as the coastal corridor, right? For birds, for sea turtles, for ocelots. Sometimes you'll hear it called the ocelot corridor, but really the ocelot's just sort of a figurehead for protecting all of these coastal lands, interior prairie, interior forests. We have Aplomado falcon in here, an incredibly successful effort to rebuild another basically decimated species that is again facing a lot of unusual threat from the activity at SpaceX. But ultimately, it's not the ship channel, it's not SpaceX, it's really causing the biggest threat to ocelots, it's all of us. And this is the hardest thing. The valley is flourishing economically, right? Like things have changed so much in the decade, 20 years I've been working down there. And it's that loss of habitat to urbanization, suburbanization, things are sprawling and roads are being built. And it's really hard to talk about this when people are enjoying a higher quality of life and enjoying opportunity, right? It becomes a very complicated story. And so this is why identifying areas that are really crucial to ocelot conservation and other species is so important right now, because this human footprint is only expanding. I mentioned roads. Roads are a byproduct of sprawl, right? You got to get around. The leading known cause of ocelot mortality in Texas are vehicular collisions. We had a terrible year in 2015 and 2016. We lost 7 ocelots on roads around Laguna Atascosa. We have, we believe, in a given year, 10 to 20 cats at Laguna. The rest live up on private land. That's not sustainable. Now, the good news is ocelots have federal protection. And what that means is when something like this happens, there's funding and a will to make a change. And so Texas Department of Transportation jumped in with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and said, what do we do? And the answer was road crossings. And we're going to look in a moment here at some imagery of those road crossings. But you can see here again, just that Laguna is that pink space off to the far right. And the numbers we were losing were shocking. It was keeping me up at night. You know, you start to question if we should even be trying to save these cats. But with road crossings, everything changed. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about what we've been able to do and what we can do. So first of all, groups like Defenders of Wildlife, we do important stuff because we defend the Endangered Species Act. A lot of my organization actually works inside the Beltway in DC, but they spend a lot of time with members of Congress, with their staff, lawmakers in general, advocating for these laws that help ensure that they remain on the books, because they are often under threat. Without these laws, there's no will for interventions like crossings for ocelots. I work here in Texas, so I do work with our local, both state and federal congressmen. This is actually a really cool webinar I did with Lloyd Doggett and Phil Hartberger is in there as well. We were talking about the infrastructure bill and how it was going to fund wildlife bridges and underpasses. And so, you know, San Antonio is now on the map as one of the most famous cities in America when it comes to wildlife crossings. And so this was a really cool opportunity to educate both lawmakers and members of the public about why these crossings matter. At Laguna, they are working to acquire more land. This is very important. They've got to fill that refuge in, make it contiguous, because these cats have to have somewhere to go. We can't continue to protect them, but not give them space to move to. Male ocelots won't overlap in range. Their ranges are small, but they need space. And so often it's the males who die on the roads. And we need corridors that they can use, that we can use like fencing and crossings to funnel them through so that they can access thorn forest. Here's our crossing. They don't look like much. That cost you millions of dollars. But they are everything. These crossings are specially designed. The ones around Laguna are specially designed for the ocelot. They did a lot of work with zoos and ocelot biologists to understand what kind of structure an ocelot would be willing to go under. They already knew these cats wouldn't go over, but then it became about, well, how do we get them to go under? And it wasn't easy at first. At first, we had cameras set up and we saw many other species, including bobcats, using them, but no ocelots. And people were starting to murmur, right? Like we built these for these cats. I always joke, if you have a cat, you know, if you buy them a toy, like they're not going to use it. Like the cats are in the box it came in, but for a year, this went on. No ocelots. And then one appeared. This is the ocelot male 283 exiting the refuge safely. This image went like crazy viral during COVID. This was released in 2020. We were all at home. People were excited to see this cat. That cat is not dead on the right. He's just sedated. I would give you a warning before that. This is ocelot male 331 exiting, and then he was caught on the refuge a couple of months later. So he had safely exited and returned. So these are working. Turns out ocelots don't like to get their paws muddy. And so it's really hard to see on this. On the left-hand side of this tunnel, they had to build a sidewalk for these cats. So this is tricky business, right? Sighting, and then you've got to fence it just so to kind of shoo them in there. But it's working because since that time, we haven't had any more deaths on the roads that we were seeing before. Sometimes a cat does die on like private lands on a road, but that's usually due to different circumstances, often at night, you know, darting out in front of like ranch vehicle. We had a similar death like that on the refuge. Not a refuge worker, but a federal employee was driving, hit one. So if you heard about a male dying a few years ago at Laguna, it was on an interior road. It's actually, I don't know if you guys know this, but we have a detention center in Laguna, Atascosa. that I don't know if we're supposed to admit is there, but it's there. I'm not a federal employee. And it was a detention center employee who ran the cat over, but he did call it in and report it appropriately. In fact, I might have a slide about that coming up, not with a dead cat. But this is a big part of the story to getting these cats back, right? We have to give them somewhere to go. And this means restoration of habitat. This is actually a private land. This is one of the Etruria properties. The Etruria family, part of the Etruria family really embraced the presence of these cats. It was very public about these cats living on their land. And Frank Etruria made sure that these lands would be forever in protection so that the cats could live there. This is a huge restoration taking place on one segment of those lands. This is a slow game though, right? Restoration takes time. Even in the valley where things grow well, it takes time to grow a mature forest. So that lack of habitat remains the single most limiting factor for ocelots, but we only have 10% of this native thorn forest remaining. So this is so important that we take these measures now, both on public land through acquisition, as well as working with private landowners. Never have to talk about the cats being there, but supporting their own restoration programs. This is why groups like the East Foundation are so important, because they are there as resources that people are comfortable in reaching out to. And then on public lands, we have groups like American Forest really leading the charge now. We also have ongoing monitoring going. This is a juvenile in the middle here. He did not mind, so they're humanely trapped. And then caught within hours, they're removed, sedated, and studied. And cats are only handled for a very short amount of time and then re-released. This guy wandered into traps multiple times. I thought you were going to do his paw. See how his paw is bigger than his face? One of the nicknames for these cats is Monty Gordo or Fat Hand. They have really big paws for their size. But you can see he's actually quite a small cat. And this is helping us to understand population dynamics, monitor health. Anytime you have a population this small, you're very worried about population health, and understand genetic relationships. So I mentioned that cat who was unfortunately killed on refuge land. This is sort of the silver lining to that story. So because that employee called it in so quickly, the biologist was able to race out there and harvest genetic material. And so that genetic material is now being stored in the system managed by the AZA, the zoo system. And some of that will be bred into captive populations, and some more will be held back for sort of future technology, shall we say. But it is so important that we have this genetic material so that we are able to keep some of the robustness in that native Texas population on hold, even if we lose cats in the wild. They are also able to extract genetic material from males who are not deceased, which is a groundbreaking procedure, first done in the wild by the ocelot biologist at Laguna. And so you may have also heard about translocation. There is talk of introducing a cat from Mexico, which would again be a nice injection of genetic diversity. It's a very complicated thing to move a cat across international boundaries. This is an act of like not peacekeeping, but like goodwill between countries, right? So the relationship between US and Mexico has to be right. Sometimes border politics get really complicated, and that can create fraught relationships between the country. So the Mexico's like, no, you don't get one of our rare cats right now, right? So we have to work delicately with the government in Mexico in order to receive this gift. So when the time is right, hopefully a cat will be translocated. And in the meantime, a lot of our work is also sociocultural, and that's actually my job. So I'm a cultural geographer by training. I'm not a biologist. And so this is part of what I do. I hang out with biologists, I learn a lot, and then I come and talk to the public. A lot of my work is about raising awareness, both in the valley and beyond, because even folks in the valley don't know that these cats are their neighbors. They're not really, you're visible on the landscape, so you don't know that they're there. We're really interested in starting to foster more pride. This is the only place in the United States where we have a population of these cats. That's super cool. And when folks hear about that in the valley, they're like, well, let's do more. So we're trying to really connect that pride to action. And we're also working to promote ocelot coexistence techniques. That means like slowing down on roads. That's the big one. Not using rodenticide. Other actions that we can ask homeowners, residents in the area to do that are fairly low effort asks. So it's not like asking people to coexist with bears, which is a lot harder. My colleagues who work on grizzly have a much bigger coexistence job than I do. All right. So another part of my work, I watch social media. So I mentioned this cat went viral. The comment section is like a boon of data for me. So I get to go in there and I see this, over and over again. People are like, I had no idea. I had no idea these cats are here. So that shows me we have a lot of work to do. Finally, the ocelots are also helping us out. We've had a great stretch of baby booms. This is 2016. This little guy was so little, they pulled him out, looked at him, and put him back. They found him, but too young to even gender. Like they don't know the sex of the cat on the right at the time he was picked up. Although now, gosh, he's like 8 years old. 2020, this little guy strolled right in front of a camera on Thanksgiving Day. And then this was 3 months ago, 2 months ago. This is the only time someone has reached out and said, I got pictures of an ocelot, and we were like, yeah, all right. Yep. That she ran across the road 3 times. This is the road into Laguna. So the road is built to slow people down. There are speed bumps, like, about the distance of this room to help slow people down. It's a good thing because these cats do cross that road. The mother ran across by herself, came back, ran across again, picked up her kitten, ran back again. So the man who was driving had time to grab his camera. The only way we got these images. And later she was identified as ocelot female 305. So she has a history. They knew who she was at the refuge. All right, so what can you do to help? Now, it's a little different with ocelots, right? The citizen science looks a little different. There's not really citizen science opportunities at the refuge. In order to even get into the ocelot occupied areas, you are way out of the area that's open to the public for obvious reasons. The private ranch lands remain private, so if you have relationships with those ranches, you might be able to participate, but otherwise, it's very much sort of a closed research program. But there are other ways, and some of them are actually pretty low effort, which is cool because it's a great engagement point for folks, not like folks in this room who are really interested, but folks who are like minorly interested in the cats. Gives them a point to interact and maybe sort of cultivate more of an interest in nature and wildlife. You can start by liking Viva the Ocelot. That is the Friends of Laguna Atascosa's social media account on Facebook. I actually run that account. And then Defenders of Wildlife Texas also has some ocelot news. Now it's really important here. When you see cool content, share it. Share it on Facebook, share it on Instagram, and add a little note on why it's important to you. Because that's how you reach people in your network, is sharing your personal story or your testimony as to why these animals matter, generally speaking in nature, but also to you personally, because that's how we reach people, right? Hearts and minds. Now, if you haven't been to Ocelot Conservation Day, I invite you to come. It's the first weekend in March at Gladys Porter Zoo. It's very family-friendly, educational activities all day long, a fun 5K, and there is an ocelot on exhibit at the zoo. Oh, that's her, Lilu. And she is genetically a Texas ocelot. Please do come visit Laguna Atascosa. The birding is world-class. Lots to see and do. Don't come in July or August though, way too hot, deadly hot. But unless there's a specific critter you're coming that time of year to see, I encourage you to come in the winter months. It's much more pleasant. Volunteer opportunities. We'll have a Rio reforestation this coming October. That'll be a habitat replanting day of thorn forest. It'll probably be near Santa Ana National Wildlife Refuge this year. And you can also practice coexistence techniques. Now, again, these are really easy, right? They're probably things you're already doing. Slow down on roads, watch out for animals, utilize poison-free rodent control. If you know folks who are hunters, encourage them to maybe take that step of going lead-free and use non-toxic ammunition. Parts of Laguna Atascosa, thanks to the Migratory Bird Act, are lead-free, but not all portions. Although I think that might be changing. There's some dealing behind the scenes on that front. And then adopt leave no trace ethics when you're recreating in ocelot or other wildlife occupied areas. Now, if you're willing to take that next step, being an advocate is so important. Speaking up for protection, speaking up for efforts, calling attention to efforts to save these animals in their habitat, reaching out to TxDOT, telling them that you like what they're doing. I don't think those folks get a lot of, like applause. I think, you hear when you work for an agency, be it local, state, federal, you get a lot of complaints, but maybe not a lot of celebration of the good that you're doing. So I think it's really important to let the folks at TxDOT know that we are on board with the work they have started, and we want to see this throughout our state. And of course, as you're able and as it aligns with your own values, opposing development that would destroy habitat and cut off the corridors for these animals. Finally, here's our license plate. I've one on my car outside if you want to see it. But the funds from this license plate go to the Friends of Laguna Atascosa, so it goes right back onto the refuge. It has funded collars on the cat's necks. Next, it's going to, the funds from this are going to fund a big ocelot country campaign to help get folks to slow down on the roads. And with your help, we can work to ensure this cat doesn't fade away. All right, so I am more than willing to take questions.
Given that I have absolutely no idea how big the launch pad was at SpaceX, it doesn't give those dimensions on TV when you're watching it. How far did the damage go? Are we talking miles? Because I heard at the time that the damage was not only extensive, but permanent in a lot of cases for habitats. How far out was the quote shock wave of the damage? Are we talking miles? Are we talking feet, yards, what?
Really good question. I'll back up and say we've had 2 test launches that have ended in disaster. One rained fiery debris in North State Park. The other burned 48 acres of, I think, the wildlife management area. So they've set significant wildfires off. Now they're setting fewer just because what they were going to set is burned, right? So we're already talking lasting damage there. The launch is trickier. We're having to wait for some data. We do know that residents of Port Isabel reported a dust all over everything outside following that launch. Actually, an article came out in Nature yesterday that I was quoted in. We are seeking information about concussion, about that shockwave. We need experts far outside of biology to start looking at this with us so we can understand what kind of damage we're talking about to the environment, to wild inhabitants, and to community. Explosions are part of experimental rocketry, right? This is just the worst possible place that this could have been happening. And I was around in like 2014 when Elon Musk started coming down there, and I have the original stuff they passed out. It was going to be a very small operation with a removable launch pad, and that frog has been boiled. And they haven't had to do an EIS, a deep dive environmental study, since 2014. A lot has changed since then, but they've been able to slow walk the work that they're doing, both in terms of the construction of the site, as well as the power of the rockets they're launching. And gosh, I mean, it's just sort of stunning to think how close South Padre is, how close human occupied areas are. I think rocketry is really cool and exciting, just not in this one place, right? It's just so vulnerable in so many ways.
As a follow-up, I understand from what I heard that there were shortcuts taken on the launch pad. Can anything be done to force those assholes to keep our environment?
This is the hard part, right? We are outside of agency action. Agencies, right? So many people have to open thumbs up. And even then, things like Challenger happen, right? I was just listening to a podcast about how Challenger, the explosion happened. Some folks had real big concerns, but they were, sort of minimized. But at least that system was working. We're talking about a private company where one man has, yay or nay.
Ka-ching, ka-ching.
Right. Yeah, a billion.
I'll get
We
down.
can direct the questions back to Ocelot.
Absolutely. I will just summarize, I will finish by saying, if you would like to learn more about SpaceX, yeah, there are concerns. I will say they are not really solely about ocelots. It's really about wildlife and birds in that area, specific piping plover, red knot. I can give you some resources, but I understand the passion because, like I said, this is what I end up doing a lot too. But yes, let's talk ocelot.
Here's a question. What is the range of a typical individual cat?
Very good question. So females have smaller ranges than males. Females ranges can be 1 to 2 miles. Males can be up to 5 or 10 miles, but it's still a much smaller range than, say, a jaguar. Jaguars can range up to 100 miles. So we're talking about fairly small home ranges.
We're talking about the publicity, social media, public relations efforts to improve the personality and the project at ocelots and making it more knowledgeable to people. That I find that kind of interesting, that aspect. I just came from southwestern Arizona on an adventure road trip and was a very lucky person to have accidentally saw a Sonoran pronghorn, which there are fewer than 200 in Arizona. And I had the wherewithal to report it to Cabeza Prieto, the wildlife that oversees the conservation efforts of that. And they were like, please don't post pictures. Please don't tell anybody. Please keep this to yourself. And they immediately closed off the road where I told them where I saw it. But I had a feeling they would want to know and take some precautions. But they don't want anybody to know anything about that, which I didn't know about it until that happened. Whereas this is a different approach. Have you tried both angles? And is this something you're finding better progress with?
Good question. I will say the location of the cat is still very anonymous. We will never, like, I'll say, oh, they're up in that pink part, but we're never going to really show you where in the refuge they are. Also, the crossings, you're not going to find a public map that's going to show you where those crossings are. There's a reason for that. When one goes viral, some folks can figure out where they are, and we immediately start seeing a lot of people on camera. It's, you know, a natural phenomenon. People are curious, right? A lot of people don't mean any harm, but we don't want humans hanging out around wildlife crossings because some animals are going to be a lot more reticent to use the space. And there is always some concern about bad actors. Less at Laguna, because that would be difficult, but like for the wild jaguars in Arizona, it's the same exact thing. We don't even talk about what mountain range they're in sometimes. Yeah, you don't want someone to go seeking them.
Like you say, the bad characters in it that you don't want to know.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Another question in the chat. How many wildlife underpasses have been built for the ocelot? Is it just the one in the photos, or have several been built and used?
Yeah, I believe there are 10 to 12, depending how you count them. Currently, mostly around Laguna, Atascosa. I believe the plan ultimately is for about 25 of these crossings. So their immense success means that we're going to see more built in the area, especially with restoration underway. Like I said, if we're restoring, we have to make sure the path is there for safe passage. You've been past there a few times.
Is the habitat in the thick brush, is that so with the habitat decline that they experienced, was that ecosystem throughout Texas, or is that a response to the human involvement? Like they're choosing that as their habitat now because that's the least likely place for you.
That's our working theory, since they're exclusively found in that forest in Texas now. That forest is not throughout their historic range. We think they were using other dense brush, but I think it's just that perfect storm of their presence and this being ideal, like matrix density of plant species, where here we consider it to be like their sole habitat. They'll cross other types of habitat, but this is what they reside in.
Another question. How long do they stay with their mom?
They can stay with their mom up to 1 to 2 years. This is part of what makes their reproduction so slow. And the female kittens may stay quite close to their mothers throughout their lives. This is the one time we'll see overlapping home ranges between a mother and her female offspring.
If fathers have any rearing responsibilities.
No, I believe like most cat species, we know fatherhood responsibilities. Yep, just female. And if you watch Ben Master's film, you'll see what an incredibly difficult job that is for these female cats.
There was another question in the chat about somebody had seen an ocelot. Can you find that question, Becca, about they saw one up in East Texas somewhere? Could it be an escaped pet? Are there still people holding ocelots as pets or in captivity in private?
You know, it's always possible. I one time had someone send me a photo and they said, this is, from a ranch in East Texas. We think it's an ocelot. It was a leopard, an African leopard.
Oh, wow.
So you do get escaped pets, wild pets. I'm sure there are certainly ocelots, being held as pets. Again, the number is nowhere like it was in the mid 20th century, but when cats pop up in very unusual locations, we are often interested in getting the genetic information on that cat, because it might be a Brazilian ocelot, which tells us a lot about how that cat maybe came to be where it was.
There's one on Instagram, always very popular, very playful, lots of fun.
Interesting.
Yeah, check it out.
Well, how many of you remember there was a TV show, like when I was a kid, so 60 years ago, that there was an ocelot as a pet held by that actress? And because I grew up thinking I wanted an ocelot.
Yeah, we have a question.
My wife and I are going to the King Ranch tomorrow.
Oh, yeah.
It's early, but I'm hoping we'll see an ocelot over there. My question is, we're going to Norius, which is real far down, say around Raymondville and that area. Not asking where, but I am asking, have you worked with the King Ranch at all? Are they open to doing anything for conservation advocacy?
Like many other enterprises that King Ranch runs, they are very forward-thinking in conservation. The Claver Wildlife Institute that's housed at Texas A&M Kingsville, I don't quite know the relationship, but they work together. And yeah, we don't want to talk about specific lots or anything, but they have been very supportive of restoration in general, of ecology in Texas.
Salute them
Yeah.
and ask them questions.
I will.
And tell them about ocelots that you just. Give them some.
Honey West,
Yeah.
Francis.
What was it called?
Honey West.
Honey West.
Detective. She was a blonde
Oh my
detective
God,
with a
really?
mole who had a pet.
She had a pet ocelot.
Wow. So we had a question front about reintroduction into areas that are being restored. Now, we do have some parcels that go back actually as far as the 1950s as restoration parcels. And so there are areas that are being reconnected via road crossings and other restoration projects. It's sort of a game of chess, putting this all back together. But on private lands too, they have a bit more latitude, right, with restoration and potentially some reintroduction, which I won't speak to too much. I'm certainly not sitting at that table, but if you watch Ben Master's film, you can learn more about that.
How much of the problem is the wall?
Really good question. Not really a problem. If you go down to the lower Rio Grande, and let me just say, for ocelots in this corridor, there is not a wall. In lower Rio Grande National Wildlife Refuge at the extent that is part of the ocelot corridor. A number of groups worked, very hard within the Beltway, so to speak, to stop wall construction in that area with the idea that we don't want to interrupt the natural continuity of that landscape. There are some long-term dreams of that being a site of an international peace park. And so that was sort of the argument that was advanced, is if we, bifurcate this. Now, that doesn't mean this is like an open border area, right? Believe me, it is heavily surveyed in other areas. It is federal land. And, but there is no wall creating a physical impediment.
Any more questions in the chat, Becca?
She already kind of went over some things like, what do they feed on, but somebody else.
Have they done any genetic diversity studies on this population to see what their status is now genetically?
That's such a good question, and I'm glad you asked it because it allows me to mention another partner I haven't mentioned yet, which is the Cincinnati Zoo, is doing incredible work. So they are the ones really leading this effort to understand the genetic diversity on private and public lands, sampling from cats, again, live cats, and to understand and to start to store some of this valuable information and material so that we can build to a future.
To kind of follow up on that question, I know that you mentioned that bringing a cat in from Mexico has a lot of political implications, but is there any genetic implications in introducing them to ours, the cats that are here versus the ones that are further south from us?
Really good question. So there's a reason all eyes are on Tamaulipas. It's the same population of cats. Human development on both sides, there are also big ranches in Tamaulipas. So that's why we've got about that 100-mile gap, right? There's human development. And that development could also be sort of restored and built back, right, toward a wild corridor. But these cats are by far Texas ocelot's most close relative. And so they are ideal candidates to be transplanted into the Texas population. There's also a welfare concern. If we are going to take a rare animal and move them, we want to make sure that they have every chance of survival. So what they will do first is pilot studies with bobcats, who are far more plentiful, so they can understand how cats act when they are disrupted, right? Moved on the landscape. What we don't want is a cat trying to go home, because that cat's not going to make it and they're going to run into trouble because there's a lot of development.
What's the status of protection in Mexico? And how many species of ocelots are there? You mentioned the Brazilian.
You know, I don't know the number of subspecies. It's a funny thing, right? There's a lot of debate on where you draw these lines between different types of species, like different subspecies of ocelot. So if you put a Brazilian ocelot next to a Texan, you see the difference. The Texans are smaller, they have a different color nose. They have dark noses. Brazilians have bright pink noses, or like they'll have dark, like, sides on their nose. Sometimes it's really dark. The Brazilian ocelots have big pink noses, like you might see on cats in the zoo. But there's still a lot of debate into, does that really matter? Or do we just get genetics? Who cares if they're from Brazil? Let's, get the gene pool diversified. What was the other part of your question?
The effort of protection of the ocelot in Mexico.
They are also endangered in Mexico and fully protected.
Is Mexican effort there notable, or is it 8%?
No, Mexico's it's a little more complicated. They have so much bureaucracy in their system. It's very difficult to navigate at times. But there are a number of scientists working through the university systems on public and private lands. Now, private and public works very different in Mexico if you're familiar with Mexican history and the ejido system. But we do have these cats flourishing in parts of Tamaulipas. And again, if you watch Ben Master's film, you will see they go down to one of those areas. And again, we don't talk very much about where that is because we don't want to invite too much interest into that remaining wild area.
That was fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I say something at the end, not only just about ocelots, but about all you wonderful people who brought all this wonderful stuff for us to eat? I meant to say that when I came up and I forgot. So thank you so much if you contributed to our delinquency. It was all delicious. Thank you.
They have retractable claws.
I think so. I'm like picturing an ocelot.
That one picture with the big slit. I didn't
Yeah.
see any claws.
I should know that. It's a big
Yeah, we looked that up.
The only cat without retractable claws is the cheetah.
I was gonna say the cheetah's jumping out in my mind. Yes, as being different. Yeah.
Are there any ocelots in Big Bend area, or do they compete with the mountain?
Really good questions. We do mountain lions on the landscape in Big Bend area. No evidence at this time of ocelots in that area. That is a tough desert through there, right? But historically, we do have records of these cats out there.
Somebody wrote in here about there appears to be 9 subspecies of ocelots. And there's a link and it says that there may be only 2.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So, yeah, are there 9? Are there 2? This is like a 200-year-old debate now, right? Like on subspecies.
Yeah, that happens first.
I bet. Only mention, no, the coloring is slightly different. Yeah.
So if we have people who didn't get or think of questions on the way home they wish they'd asked, how would we find answers to those? What's the best source on the internet or
Yeah, you know,
besides you?
you're always welcome to reach out to me. Visit Defenders of Wildlife's website. You can also, I really encourage you to go Friends of Laguna Atascosa's website. I believe that's vivaocelot.org or .com. That'll get you there. And there's a lot of information to start you off. If you're a science paper nerd, you can Google like ocelot and habitat. You'll see a lot of current work being done at UTRGV, UTSA, Texas A&M Kingsville. A lot of great research being done by young scholars to help us understand where these cats live and where they can go.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I know you have to drive back to Austin, but if you can, if anybody wants to say anything, not in front of the group or personally, and if you did bring something, if you would take your container back unless it's priceless, and then we'll take it. But be sure to take anything back that you need to take with you. And anything?
No, thanks everybody for coming out. Hope to see you, June, when we talk about next year. Yeah, June, 4 weeks. When we talk about microplastics and the carrot.
And in this.
And wildlife. It's actually a very interesting discussion with Alex Baum.
Thank you all for coming.